Hi, my name is Delaney Rhodes. I'm 25 years old, and this is my story. It's a story about family, failure, and a moment so shocking that it silenced an entire room full of soldiers. A moment where everything they thought they knew about me, everything I thought I had lost, was rewritten by just a single word: general. But it didn't start that way. If someone had told me 5 years ago that I would be standing in full military uniform in front of my sister's commander, one of the most feared and respected figures at the base in Little Rock, I would have laughed. No one in my family, not even my sister, believed in me. They said I was too sensitive, too soft, too stubborn, too much, and yet never enough. I was the disappointment, the dropout, the one who couldn't even finish community college without melting down. But behind every failure they accused me of was a reason they never asked to understand, and the fire that they believed had burned me to ashes, well, it was the same fire I used to rise again. I grew up in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Small-town charm, tight-lipped gossip, and family ties that strangle more than they support. I was the eldest of three, but I never felt like the firstborn. That spotlight belonged to my younger sister, Kara. She was everything our parents ever wanted. Straight-A student, athlete, beauty queen, ROTC captain. Even before she enlisted, everyone called her Soldier Girl. Our parents bragged about her like she was already a national hero. And me? I was the creative one. That's how they sugarcoated failure. The truth was, I had panic attacks. I had depression. I had days where getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain in the dark with no shoes and no map. But no one wanted to hear that. In our house, feelings were a sign of weakness, and weakness was unacceptable. I was told to snap out of it, man up, stop being dramatic. But I wasn't being dramatic. I was drowning. After dropping out of college, I tried working retail, then waitressing, then warehouse shifts at night just to stay afloat. Every dinner with my family turned into a silent war zone. I could feel their eyes judging me, their smiles tight, like they were embarrassed to be related to me. Kara barely spoke to me anymore. She had joined the military and was off in a world that rewarded discipline and results, not emotion or softness. Whenever she came home on leave, the air would grow cold. She'd show off her medals and mission photos while I quietly washed dishes in the background. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner, my father looked at me across the table and said, "It's a shame you didn't follow your sister's path. She made something of herself." I felt the sting behind those words more than the heat of the sweet potatoes on my plate. My mom didn't correct him. Kara didn't blink. I swallowed the ache like dry glass and forced a smile, but something inside me snapped that night. Not in a rage, not in sorrow, but in clarity. I realized I didn't owe them proof. I owed myself a chance, a real chance. So I disappeared. Not literally. I still lived in town, still went to work, still paid rent on time. But I stopped answering calls. I stopped showing up to family dinners. I stopped pretending. And behind the scenes, I rebuilt myself from the ground up. I started training again, physically and mentally. I began seeing a therapist through a veterans referral program, even though I wasn't enlisted yet. I studied military psychology, strategy, endurance, warfare history. I applied to officer candidate school under a new structure, through an accelerated path based on civilian performance and private military contracts. It wasn't traditional, but neither was I. It wasn't easy. God, it wasn't easy. Every day I trained was a war against the voice in my head that sounded like my father. "You're not strong enough. You'll quit just like last time." But every drop of sweat, every mile run in silence, every exam I passed, every time I pushed through the fear, I carved out a piece of the woman I was meant to become. No one was watching, no one was clapping, but I knew. And then came the opportunity I never expected. A private commission offer through a confidential government training program in D.C. It was connected to operations overseas, heavily classified, but legit. The kind of offer people dream about, and most never believe exists. After a year in the shadows of that training, I earned my insignia. Not a regular badge, a star, 1 star, Brigadier General. But the program was so obscure, so off-grid, that even those close to us wouldn't know who we were unless they had clearance. Which meant my family had no idea, and I liked it that way. Let them believe I was the failure. Let them keep their illusions. Until one day, fate handed me a moment I never could have planned. It was Kara's promotion ceremony at the base in Little Rock. She was moving up to first lieutenant, and my parents were beaming with pride. I hadn't planned to go, but then I got a call. Not from her, from his office, her commander. Apparently, someone at the Department of Defense had flagged our familial link. He requested my presence, officially. So I went. In uniform, clean boots, tight bun, insignia polished to a gleam. I didn't walk in with fanfare. I waited in the back, watching her ceremony unfold like a movie I no longer starred in. And then, when the introductions ended and the commander turned to close the event, he paused. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on me. "Ma'am," he said, stepping forward, "would you do us the honor?" The room fell silent. Everyone turned. My father's face twisted in confusion. My mother blinked. Kara looked like she saw a ghost. I walked forward slowly. Every step echoed louder than the last. When I reached the front, the commander saluted me. "Permission to introduce you properly," he said. I nodded once. He turned back to the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this is Brigadier General Delaney Rhodes." Gasps, whispers. One audible, "What?" And then Kara's voice, shaking, small. "Wait, you're the general?" I looked her dead in the eyes. "Yes, I am." And that moment, just that moment, was all I needed. Not applause, not validation, just truth. But don't worry, that was only the beginning. You want to know how I got there? What it cost me? What I sacrificed to earn that title? And what I did afterward to make things right? Or maybe make them pay? Well, keep listening, because this story is far from over. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if this story is speaking to you so far, hit that like button and subscribe to follow how I turned rejection into purpose and silence into strength. My parents didn't say a word after the ceremony. Not when I handed back the folded program with Kara's name on it. Not when I turned and left the base without waiting for their congratulations or questions. They just stood there, frozen, as if someone had flipped the world upside down and forgotten to warn them. And in a way, someone had. Me. But walking away that day didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of a war that had been simmering under the surface for years. Because while I'd earned my place in a world they never imagined I belonged to, I hadn't yet decided what to do with the power I now held. Was it enough just to be seen? Or was I supposed to teach them a lesson they'd never forget? Kara called 2 days later. I didn't answer. She texted after midnight. "We need to talk. Please." That wasn't like her. Kara didn't plead. She ordered. She commanded. But that night she sounded like a little sister again. I let the message sit unread. It wasn't that I hated her. I didn't. But love and rage are sometimes made of the same fibers, just woven in different directions. She'd watched me crumble. She'd joined the chorus that labeled me weak. And the part that hurt most? She had once been my best friend. When we were kids, she was the one who'd sneak into my room after nightmares, the one who'd braid my hair before school, the one who whispered that I could do anything, until the day she decided I couldn't. I was 12 when my panic attack started. We were at a friend's birthday party. Loud music, spinning lights, and something inside me snapped like a rubber band pulled too tight. I couldn't breathe. My hands went numb. My chest felt like it was caving in. Kara was the one who found me in the backyard, curled up and shaking behind the shed. She sat with me. She held my hand. She told me I was okay. But something changed when we hit high school. She stopped telling me I was okay. She started rolling her eyes, started pulling away. And when I dropped out of college, she said, "You quit everything you start. Maybe you just weren't meant to do anything hard." I don't think she even realized she'd become our parents' echo. After the promotion ceremony, news started spreading, fast. Military circles aren't as big as they seem, and once word got out that a one-star general had walked into the room unannounced, people began asking questions. My father's colleagues started calling. My mother's church group fell silent. The whispers were no longer about how I'd failed, but about how I'd risen so far beyond what anyone expected that they now had to rewrite their own stories about me. I got an invitation to speak at a leadership summit in DC. They wanted me to talk about resilience, transformation, and unexpected leaders. I agreed. not for the spotlight, but for the quiet message it would send back home. I am not your failure. A week before the event, I saw Kara again. She showed up at my apartment in Fayetteville, standing on the porch in uniform, hair tied back, hands fidgeting at her sides. I opened the door slowly, unsure whether I wanted to invite her in or close it just as gently. "You look good," she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was surprise. I stepped aside. "You drove 3 hours just to say that?" She walked in, looked around, took in the framed certificates on the wall, the photos from my time overseas, the insignia case on the shelf. "I didn't know," she said finally, "about the program, about any of it." "You didn't ask," I replied. She sat down on the couch. I stayed standing. "I was jealous," she said, eyes focused on a spot on the floor. "When we were younger, you were always creative, brave in ways I didn't understand. And then you started falling apart and I didn't know how to help you. So I just stopped trying. The silence between us was heavy but not empty. I became everything they wanted," she said, "but it didn't make me happy. And when I saw you up there, I didn't feel angry. I felt proud, but also ashamed. I wanted to say something that would puncture the years between us and thread the distance back together. But all I could manage was, 'Why now?' Because I realized," she said, looking up at me, "that I lost my sister chasing a version of success that wasn't even mine." It was the most honest thing she'd said in a decade. We sat together for hours that night. We didn't solve everything. We didn't cry in each other's arms or laugh like we used to. But we started. And for me, that was enough, almost. Because while Kara was trying to make amends, my parents were on a very different path. I received an email from a journalist 2 days after Kara's visit. He claimed my parents were trying to pitch a story to a local paper about how they inspired both daughters to rise in the ranks, how their strict upbringing shaped us into national heroes. He wanted a comment. I wanted to scream. All those years of silence, of judgment, of shame, and now they wanted to wear my success like a medal they earned, to rewrite the narrative and place themselves at the center of a story they tried to erase. No, I declined the article request. But I didn't stop there. I scheduled a private dinner, just the 4 of us, Kara included, a public place, neutral, controlled. We sat at a round table in the back of a steakhouse in downtown Fayetteville. They smiled like politicians. My father made a joke about having 2 soldiers in the family now. My mother said she always knew I'd surprise them. I let them talk. Then I opened my phone and played back the voicemail my father had left me 3 years earlier. The one I'd saved. The one where he said, "Don't come back until you've made something of yourself." They froze. "You said I wasn't worth your time," I reminded them. "You said I was a waste of potential. You let me eat dinner alone while you toasted Kara's scholarships." My mother opened her mouth, closed it. "And now you want to stand beside me in pictures? Take credit for what I built in silence? You didn't build me. You buried me." I placed an envelope on the table. Inside were printed transcripts of interviews I'd done, summaries of programs I'd led, and a formal letter from the Department of Defense confirming my service. All signed, all verified. "Use that," I said. "If you want to tell a story, tell the truth." Then I stood up and left. Kara followed me out. "That was intense," she said quietly. "I'm not done," I told her, "but I'm just getting started. Because revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes it comes in silence, in truth, in the refusal to be rewritten. And I wasn't just rewriting my story, I was reclaiming it. Let me tell you what happened next. 2 weeks after that dinner, I stood on stage at the National Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C. The lights were hot on my face, and the room was packed. Generals, senators, civilians, journalists, students. People who had only ever heard whispers about my program. People who still didn't know if someone like me was supposed to exist. And I was about to make them very uncomfortable. "My name is Brigadier General Delaney Rhodes," I began, voice steady, gaze unwavering. "I am not here because I followed the rules. I am here because I didn't." There was a pause, the kind that makes every throat tighten just a little. I wasn't built by legacy or legacy connections. I wasn't handed a role. I wasn't praised into greatness. I was told I had failed. By my community, by my educators, by my own family. And I believed it. Until I didn't. I saw someone shift in their seat. Another leaned forward. I didn't get here by being the strongest. I got here by being the one who didn't stop showing up, through panic attacks, through depression, through ridicule and doubt and days when I couldn't even stand upright in my own mind. For the first time in years, I spoke those words in front of a crowd without shame. Because the moment you speak your story on your own terms, it no longer owns you. You own it. And today, I continued, I command a team that operates in silence, in the shadows, in the unseen margins of national security. We were trained not to be celebrated, but to be effective. And I believe the people who understand failure are often the most prepared to lead with empathy, vision, and endurance. By the end of the speech, people were standing. Not everyone, but enough. And in the crowd, just beneath the balcony railing, I saw a familiar face. Kara. She wasn't smiling. She was crying. Afterward, she found me backstage. "I've never been so proud of you," she said, choking through the words. "And I know that doesn't fix anything." "It doesn't," I said, "but it helps." She nodded slowly. "They saw the live stream, Mom and Dad." "Of course they had." "Then they know," I said simply. That week, my inbox exploded. Requests for interviews, guest lectures, profiles in major magazines. I turned them all down. I hadn't come to play the media's game, but one request stood out: an internal review board from the Department of Defense. They were forming a task force for high-level strategic leadership and mental health integration. They wanted me to serve as co-lead. It was the kind of offer that changes not just careers, but systems. And it came with power, not just rank-and-file power, but access, visibility, decision-making, the ability to make or break careers, including, as it turned out, my father's. I learned through a quiet source that my father had submitted his name for a consultancy bid, military-adjacent, logistical operations, based out of Little Rock. Nothing flashy, nothing public, but his name was in the file, and my signature would be one of 3 needed to approve or deny his clearance. And just like that, the tables were turned. The man who told me I wasn't worth listening to was now unknowingly asking me for permission to work within the very system he claimed I could never survive. I didn't respond immediately. I let the file sit on my desk. I read his resume. I read the cover letter he'd written. It was filled with exaggerated phrasing, lead teams, adaptable, deep understanding of military family dynamics. Military family dynamics. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. I thought about all the nights I spent in silence, the birthdays skipped, the public humiliation, the way he used to say, "That's not real work," when I tried to explain what panic attacks felt like. I thought about how he once refused to pick me up from a clinic because, in his words, "People like you end up in padded rooms, not command posts." I could have denied the file right then. One signature, a single click, but something in me stopped. Revenge wasn't about crushing someone with the same hands they used to wound you. It was about choosing not to bleed for them anymore. Instead, I made a call. Direct, cold, controlled. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" "Hi, Dad," I said. My voice didn't shake. "It's Delaney." Silence. "Delaney. Wow. I didn't think you'd—" "I saw your file." More silence. He didn't deny it. "I want you to know," I continued, "that I read every word." I could hear his breath, unsteady now. "I won't be signing it," I said, "but I'm not rejecting it either. I've passed it to the next level without endorsement." "What does that mean?" "It means you'll be evaluated based on merit, not legacy, not reputation, just facts." Another pause. This one heavier. "Thank you," he said, almost a whisper. "I didn't do it for you," I replied. "I did it because I don't play by your rules anymore." I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there, feeling the strange, quiet ache of victory. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sweet. But it was mine. And then I got a call from Kara. "There's something you need to know," she said. "What is it?" "Mom's been telling people she always knew you'd be great, that she was the one who told you to join the military." Of course she was. I laughed, dry and tired. "Let her have her stories," I said. "They're not mine." But the truth was, I wasn't done. There was one final reckoning I still owed myself. I returned to the college where I had first dropped out, the place where I had sat in that tiny counselor's office, tears streaming down my face, being told I should consider less demanding paths. They had since added my name to their alumni list after news of my commission surfaced. A quiet addition, no apology, no contact. So I requested to give the keynote at their commencement ceremony. They hesitated. I insisted. And when I took the podium that day, in front of hundreds of graduating students, I didn't bring up rank or service medals. I brought a copy of my old transcript. This, I said, holding it up, is what failure looks like. According to your systems, your scales, your checklists. I paused. And this, I said, pointing to myself, is what it looks like when failure fights back. I didn't want their approval. I wanted the next girl who felt like she was drowning in a dorm room to hear someone say, "You can fall and still rise, not despite the fall, but because of it." After the speech, one of the professors came up to me. She had tears in her eyes. "I was here when you left," she said. "I remember the rumors. I just want you to know we were wrong." "I know," I said, "but thank you for saying it." That night, back in Fayetteville, I sat alone on my porch, looking up at the stars. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel suffocating. It felt clean, honest. Because the truth is, revenge isn't always fire. Sometimes it's a slow, silent rising. And I wasn't done rising. I started running again. Not because I had to, not because anyone was watching, but because movement helped me process the stillness. And after everything, the ceremony, the confrontation, the speech, I needed space to feel the aftermath. Some people talk about closure like it's a door you get to shut forever. But for me, it felt more like learning how to breathe inside a room you used to suffocate in. The morning air in Fayetteville in early March was sharp and cold. My boots pounded the path through Wilson Park as the sun broke gently through the clouds. My breath left my body in short white puffs, but I kept running. I wasn't chasing anything. I wasn't escaping. I was just moving forward. 3 miles in, I stopped at the top of a small hill near the creek. The place where Kara and I used to come as kids, long before medals and uniforms and silence had turned us into strangers. I sat on the edge of the wooden bridge and watched the water ripple beneath me. It was strange, how healing sometimes crept in so quietly, not like a thunderclap, not like a movie moment, but like a slow sunrise after a long night, almost unnoticeable until it filled the whole sky. A week later, Kara invited me to speak to her unit. "I think it would mean something coming from you," she said over the phone. "Some of the women, they don't believe there's a way forward after what they've been through." I knew exactly what she meant. She had taken a new leadership role at the base, mentoring younger recruits and overseeing conflict mediation. She was good at it. Her voice had changed lately, softer, more grounded. The edge was still there, it always would be, but now it came with context, with compassion. I agreed to speak, and on the day of the meeting, I walked into a modest rec room filled with folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, and soldiers who looked more tired than I had expected. Some were barely out of high school. Others had lines on their faces that said they'd seen more than they should have at any age. I didn't stand behind a podium. I stood among them. "I'm not here to give you orders," I began. "I'm here to tell you the truth." And then I shared it. Not the headline, not the resume, the truth. I told them about being misunderstood, about collapsing in a college stairwell, about the fear that your best effort still won't be enough. I told them about the loneliness of leadership, the ache of rebuilding yourself in secret, and the power of doing something just because it terrifies you. I told them about the long nights, the invisible victories, the days I wanted to quit, and the reasons I didn't. No one interrupted. No one checked their phone. They just listened. Afterwards, one of the youngest soldiers, barely 20, came up to me with tears brimming in her eyes. "I thought I had to be perfect," she said, "that if I ever fell apart, it meant I wasn't cut out for this." "You don't have to be perfect," I told her. "You just have to keep showing up." That afternoon stayed with me long after I left the base, because it was the first time I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a bridge, something others could walk across to find their own way forward. And something shifted in me. For the first time in years, I stopped thinking about revenge as the end goal. It had served its purpose. But now, I wanted something else. I wanted to build. I took the task force position in DC. It was demanding, political, full of pressure. But it gave me access, influence. I could push for programs that prioritized mental health without burying it in red tape. I could redirect funds toward crisis counseling and trauma recovery for active service members. And I did. I wrote new protocols. I sat in rooms with men who barely looked at me, and I made them listen. I learned the dance of power, how to wield it without becoming it. I refused to let the systems that once crushed me remain untouched. And slowly, quietly, things began to shift. But it wasn't just work that changed. Kara and I started meeting every Sunday for coffee. It was awkward at first. We didn't always know what to say. Sometimes we just sat in silence. But slowly, the gaps filled in. We talked about our childhood, about the moments we misread each other, the wounds we both carried, the pride we were never allowed to show. We cried once, in the middle of a cafe when she told me, "I used to wish I was more like you. I just didn't know how to say it." One night, as we walked back to my car, she looked at me and asked, "Do you think you'll ever forgive them, Mom and Dad?" I didn't answer right away. "I think," I said slowly, "that forgiveness isn't about pretending they didn't break something. It's about deciding I'm not going to carry the pieces anymore." She nodded. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. My father's file eventually came back. He didn't get the position. I never found out whether it was due to his background, his attitude, or his lack of updated credentials. I didn't ask. He never called again. Neither did my mother. And for the first time, that didn't feel like an open wound. It felt like clarity. Sometimes, when a door stays closed long enough, you stop waiting for it to open. You build your own house. I started mentoring younger women in my unit. Not just about combat or protocol, but about life. I told them what no one had told me. That strength isn't the absence of struggle. That leadership starts the moment you choose integrity over performance. That you don't have to shout to be powerful, and you don't have to hide to be safe. The more I shared, the more I healed. One of the women I mentored, Lieutenant Becca Monroe, pulled me aside one afternoon. "Do you ever regret what it took to get here?" she asked. I thought about that for a long time. "I regret how long I believed I wasn't allowed to try," I finally said. "But no, I don't regret surviving." She smiled. "You didn't just survive. You turned it into fire." I didn't respond. I didn't have to, because that was the truth, wasn't it? I had taken every moment of dismissal, every slight, every invisible battle, and I had turned it into something stronger, not just for me, but for the women who came after me. And I wasn't done yet. There was still more to do, more to say, more to build. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't climbing from a place of desperation. I was moving from a place of power. And that changed everything. 2 months after I settled into the task force role in DC, I received an unmarked envelope slid under the door of my office. No postage, no sender, just my name typed neatly across the front, Brigadier General Delaney Rhodes. I hesitated before opening it. There was something too quiet about it, too deliberate. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick, ivory, and formal. It was an invitation, a private donor gala being hosted in Little Rock. Military figures, government partners, veterans. All the familiar names were listed on the back, but it wasn't the event itself that caught my attention. It was the final name printed under the honorary board of advisors. My father, Kenneth Rhodes. Apparently, while he hadn't secured the contract he wanted, he'd found another way in, donor circles, connections through old friends. He was on the advisory board for a veterans outreach program linked to one of the task force's new initiatives, a program I had personally helped shape. I stared at the paper for a long time. My chest didn't burn. My hands didn't shake. But something in me felt unsteady, like the floor had subtly tilted beneath me, and I was just now noticing. He was still trying to rewrite the story, still painting himself as a supporting character in a narrative he had tried so hard to extinguish. The man who never once said, "I'm proud of you," was now listed as a face of military advocacy, and I knew what would happen at that event. There would be speeches, toasts, smiles. He would name-drop his daughters, talk about how military service ran in our blood, and pretend like the years of silence and shame were some kind of motivational hardship, and everyone would clap, unless I stopped it. I RSVP'd. I didn't tell Kara. I didn't announce anything on social media or notify the press. I simply confirmed my attendance and chose a seat at the head table. The organizers were thrilled. "Having you there elevates the entire evening," one of them gushed over the phone. "The keynote speech is still being finalized, but we'd love a short address from you too, if you're open to it." I said I'd think about it. The night of the gala, I wore my dress blues. Full honors, medals aligned, hair twisted back into a flawless chignon. The heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as I entered the venue, a high-ceilinged hotel ballroom in downtown Little Rock, chandeliers dripping from the ceiling like crystal waterfalls. Conversations hushed as I passed. I saw him before he saw me. My father stood near the stage, shaking hands, laughing with someone I vaguely recognized from defense appropriations. His tie was sharp, his posture crisp. He looked rehearsed. And then, as if feeling a disturbance in the current he thought he controlled, he turned. Our eyes locked. He froze. I didn't smile. He started walking toward me, hesitation wrapped inside every step. "Delaney," he said when he reached me. Not general, not daughter, just my name, like he was still trying to figure out how I fit into the shape of his evening. "I didn't know you'd be here," he added, voice strained. "Of course you didn't," I replied. "You weren't supposed to." He opened his mouth, closed it again. His eyes scanned the room, searching for something, maybe an excuse, maybe a way out. "I'm part of the board now," he finally said. "Just trying to give back, you know?" I stared at him. "Give back?" I echoed. "To what? The people you once said didn't belong in uniforms? The same system you told me I'd never survive?" He lowered his gaze. "This isn't yours to claim," I said, quietly but firmly. "You don't get to walk in after the fire and pretend you helped put it out." Before he could respond, a woman with a clipboard appeared beside me. "General Rhodes, we're ready for you backstage. You're on in 10. I nodded and followed her, leaving my father standing in the middle of a ballroom full of people who still thought they understood power. Backstage, the organizer handed me a copy of the speech they'd prepared. "You can stick to the script or go off book. Totally your call." I glanced down at the typed pages. It was safe, polished, full of standard gratitude and protocol. It wasn't a speech. It was an apology in advance for making anyone uncomfortable. I handed it back. "I'll use my own words," I said. When I stepped out onto the stage, the room quieted instantly. Cameras flashed. Forks paused midair. I walked to the microphone and looked around at the hundreds of faces, some familiar, most not. "I've been asked to speak about honor tonight," I began. "But honor, like family, is not always visible, and it is certainly not always mutual." A few people shifted in their seats. "I was raised in a house where silence was louder than support," I continued, "where failure was assumed if you didn't fit the mold, and where success was only acknowledged if it looked the way they expected it to." My voice didn't tremble. I wasn't nervous. "I stand here tonight not because I followed a straight path. I didn't. I was broken, underestimated, forgotten, dismissed, not just by society, but by the people who were supposed to love me. But I rebuilt myself, in silence, in defiance, and eventually, in power." Now I looked directly at my father, who sat 2 tables back, flanked by donors. "This uniform I wear? I didn't earn it to prove them wrong. I earned it to prove myself right." A woman in the front row nodded slowly, her eyes moist. "My story is not theirs to rewrite," I said, "and neither is yours." I stepped back from the microphone to the sound of cautious applause. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Enough for those who needed to hear it, and enough for those who wished I hadn't said it at all. After the speech, I didn't wait around for photos. I walked out through the side exit into the cool night air. The moon was sharp and high, like a blade in the sky. I didn't hear his footsteps behind me, but I knew he'd follow. "Delaney," he said again. I turned slowly. "You embarrassed me." he said, in front of everyone. No, I replied. I told the truth. That's not the same thing. He stood there, arms crossed, trying to summon the version of himself that had once towered over me, but he couldn't find it. Not anymore. I did what I thought was best, he muttered. No, I said. You did what was easy. For you. You silenced what you didn't understand and called it strength. He didn't respond. I stepped closer. You don't get to rebuild your reputation with my story, I said. If you want to give back, start by telling the truth. About who you were. About what you said. About who you hurt. I walked away then. Not fast. Not triumphant. But complete. Because sometimes the climax isn't about confrontation. It's about standing in the very place where you were once made small and refusing to shrink. That night, I sat in my hotel room overlooking the Arkansas River. Kara called, asking how the event went. I told her everything. She didn't say much, just, I'm proud of you. It was enough, because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I wasn't just fighting. I was changing the shape of the world that had once tried to erase me. And it still wasn't over. The weeks after the gala passed like a slow exhale. Nothing explosive happened. There were no more phone calls from my father, no final letters, no dramatic confrontation. It was almost as if he had finally understood something, not through the kind of apology I had long given up hoping for, but in the silence that followed my truth. Silence can mean a lot of things, but this time it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like retreat. I went back to DC and settled into my new rhythm. There were still endless meetings, strategy sessions, late-night calls about operational budgets, and interdepartmental friction. But beneath it all, something had shifted inside me. I wasn't fighting for recognition anymore. I wasn't trying to prove I belonged. I had already arrived, and now I was focused on making the space better for whoever came next. One of the initiatives I launched that spring was called Echo Recovery. It wasn't flashy, it didn't make the headlines, but it mattered. It provided confidential, trauma-informed mental health support for young recruits who had never felt safe using the existing structures. The very system that once told me I was too fragile now had my name on policies designed to protect others like me. At the launch event, a 19-year-old cadet from Fort Bragg approached me. She had a sharp look in her eye and a nervous sort of strength in her posture, like someone who'd learned to survive by scanning every room before speaking. I just wanted to say, I think I'm still here because of something you said last year. I blinked, surprised. Where did you hear me speak? She hesitated, then smiled faintly. You were on that DC panel about invisible wounds. You said something about not needing to be perfect. That strength doesn't look the same on everyone. I wrote it down on a Post-it and stuck it on my mirror. I felt a knot form in my chest. Not sadness, not even pride, just a deep, human recognition. You're not alone, I told her. And you're never a burden for needing help. She nodded. And then she said, my CO doesn't get it, but knowing someone like you made it, it helps. And that's when I realized that everything I had endured, the collapse, the exile, the silence, the climb, had not been for nothing. It had not just led me to healing. It had allowed me to build something real, something lasting. And even if no one ever wrote about it, even if the world never fully knew, I would know. And so would every woman who walked through those doors with trembling hands and eyes full of questions. Kara started coming to visit me in DC more often, not out of obligation, not for holiday dinners or family reunions, just because she wanted to. We would walk the trails in Rock Creek Park, sit by the water with hot coffee, and talk about things that no longer needed to be resolved, just shared. One afternoon, as we watched the sunlight dance across the Potomac, she said something that stayed with me. I used to think strength meant doing it all alone, she said. But you taught me that it takes more courage to ask for help than it does to keep pretending. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat in the stillness of understanding. And that was enough. Our mother eventually sent a card. A birthday card. No note, no apology, just a signature and a printed quote on the inside. May you always know how far you've come. I didn't respond. I didn't resent it. I just read it once, then tucked it away in a drawer. Some wounds don't bleed anymore, but they don't close either. You learn to live with them. You learn not to scratch where it itches. My father's name eventually disappeared from the advisory board. Quietly. No press release. I suspected he stepped down on his own, maybe realizing he no longer had the stomach to sit in rooms where his daughter's name carried more weight than his. I never confirmed it. Some endings don't come with punctuation. They just stop. But life didn't stop. I was promoted again that summer. 2 stars now. Major General. When they called to inform me, I was in the middle of a training session at Quantico, working with a group of young officers on field scenario simulations. I accepted the news with a nod, then turned right back to my class. Because that's what it had become about. Not the rank, but the reach. Not the title, but the impact. I visited Fayetteville less often, not out of bitterness, just practicality. That chapter had been written, but every time I did return, I'd take the same run through Wilson Park. I'd stop on the same bridge. And sometimes I'd see my reflection in the water, not as a broken girl trying to find air, but as a woman who had learned to swim in silence and rise in fire. Once, on a random afternoon in August, I got a message from one of the professors at the college I had dropped out of all those years ago. "We're launching a resilience scholarship in your name," it read. "It's for students who have faced mental health challenges and need a second chance. We'd be honored if you'd help us shape it." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "Yes, let's build something that lasts," because that's what I had learned, above everything else. That revenge isn't always about the takedown. Sometimes it's about becoming so undeniable, so immovable in your truth, that the people who once tried to erase you have to live with the fact that they never could. I wasn't the girl who failed anymore. I wasn't the sister in the shadow. I wasn't the daughter who disappointed. I was the woman who rebuilt everything they tried to break. And I didn't do it for applause. I didn't do it for closure. I did it because I had to, and because someone else would come after me. Someone with shaking hands and a burning heart and a voice still buried under years of being told they weren't enough. And when they came, I wanted them to find a door that was already open. So yes, the world can be cruel. Families can fail you. Silence can feel like death. But none of that means you stop. You rise. You build. You speak. And you never, ever hand your story to someone else to finish. A few years later, I was walking through the halls of the Pentagon when a young cadet approached me. She couldn't have been more than 21. Her eyes were wide, and her hands trembled just slightly as she clutched a folder close to her chest. She didn't introduce herself right away. She just stood there, blinking too much, trying to find the words she'd been practicing in her head. "I know you don't know me," she finally said, "but I've read everything you've written. You changed everything for me." I looked at her carefully. Not just the uniform or the nervous smile, but the weight she was carrying in her shoulders. The kind of weight I used to carry too. "Thank you," I said. "I was just like you once. Don't forget that." She nodded quickly, like that reminder was more powerful than 1,000 congratulations. And then she asked if she could walk with me, just for a moment. I said yes. We moved slowly through the corridor, her questions tumbling out between long pauses. "How did you get through the moments when no one believed in you?" I stopped waiting for them to. "Did you ever think about quitting?" "Every day. But I also thought about who I could become if I didn't." We reached the glass doors that led outside. She stopped there, biting her lip like she didn't want to say what she was about to say next. "My mother told me I'd never last a year here. Said I wasn't built for it. That I was too emotional, too sensitive." I didn't flinch. That story was all too familiar. "I used to think being emotional was a flaw," I said. "Now I see it for what it is. Proof that you care. That you feel the weight of this world deeply. That you don't shut it out to make it easier. That's not weakness. That's moral strength." She smiled at me, and I could tell she was filing those words away. Not for now. For later. For the hard days. After she left, I stood at the top of those steps for a long time, watching the sun stretch across the city. I thought about all the versions of myself that had existed before this one. The girl who dropped out. The one who cried in silence. The one who trained in secret. The one who stood on a stage and rewrote her family's narrative with nothing more than her voice. They were all still inside me somehow. Not ghosts, just echoes. A few months after that, Kara called. She was moving to DC for a new role, liaison between field command and policy development. We met for dinner the night she arrived, sitting on the rooftop of a quiet restaurant overlooking the Capitol Dome. The sky was painted in soft oranges and deep purples, and for a long while, neither of us said anything. "You ever think about going back?" she finally asked. "To Fayetteville?" "To the house. To them." I shook my head gently. "No, not because I'm angry. Just because there's nothing left for me there." She nodded slowly, understanding more in that silence than words could have explained. "Do you think they ever understood?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "But understanding doesn't always come with responsibility or regret. And I've stopped waiting for either." Kara raised her glass. "To building something better." I raised mine too. "To making sure no one else has to climb alone." And we clinked glasses, not as sisters trying to repair a broken past, but as women building a stronger future. Over the next few years, Echo Recovery expanded beyond anything I had originally imagined. It spread to bases across the country, then to allied units abroad. We added training programs, emergency hotlines, and family support divisions. Stories poured in, quiet thank yous, messages from people who had been on the brink and chose to stay, because they knew they weren't alone. I never became the face of a movement. I didn't want that, but I became something else. A presence, a voice, a reminder that even if the world tries to erase you, you can still carve yourself into it with fire and grace. One spring, I was asked to return to the same college where I once fell apart. They had created a new wing, the Rhodes Center for Resilience and Leadership. They unveiled a plaque in my honor. But the part that mattered most wasn't the ceremony or the applause. It was the woman who came up to me afterward, her eyes brimming with tears. "My daughter just got diagnosed with panic disorder," she said. "We thought she'd never make it here. But then she read your story. She said, 'If she can do it, so can I.' That's when I felt the tears come. Not the kind born from pain, but the kind that rise when you realize your worst days gave someone else a lifeline." I gave a short speech that day. Nothing formal, nothing planned. "I'm not here because I was brave," I told them. "I'm here because I refused to believe the people who said I couldn't be, and because somewhere inside me, even on the worst nights, I believed there had to be something more." I ended with a promise. That door will never close again, not for anyone else. Years passed. My uniform gained new insignia. My hair grew streaks of silver I didn't try to hide. I watched entire generations rise through the ranks, some fierce, some afraid, all of them shaped by the choices people like me had made before them. And I never stopped fighting, not with fists, not with fire, but with presence, with policy, with truth. And when I finally chose to step away from active duty, I didn't feel loss. I felt peace, because I knew the work would continue. Kara and I bought a cabin outside Shenandoah. Quiet, wooded, the kind of place where the air feels clean and everything makes sense again. On weekends, we'd sit on the porch with tea and share stories, not of war, not of pain, but of growth, of who we used to be, of who we helped others become. Sometimes I would write in the mornings, not reports, not memos, just reflections, little letters to the girl I used to be. One of them read, "You were never weak. You were simply waiting to find a world where your strength would be recognized. And when that world didn't exist, you built it." That girl deserved to hear it. So did every girl who ever sat in a dorm room, a barrack, a hospital bed, thinking she had nothing left to give. And maybe, someday, one of them will find my story. Not in a textbook, not in a headline, but in a quiet corner of the world where courage is born from silence. And maybe she'll think to herself, "If she did it, so can I." And that will be enough, because this was never about vengeance alone. It was about turning the pain into something permanent, something beautiful, something true. Have you ever been told you weren't enough by the very people who should have loved you most? Share your story in the comments. If Delaney's journey moved you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of resilience, truth, and transformation. Share this with someone who needs to know that their worth isn't defined by others. Sometimes the best kind of revenge is becoming everything they said you could never be. Thank you for watching. And remember, you don't need permission to reclaim your story.